Example of that.
Very much so.
Thank you, Barry. So as Barry said, I'm going to give an example of one of the potential innovation voucher type offerings that we can provide, and it's not to say that this is the only offering that we can provide. So both Willie and Barry have discussed the areas that TSSG operates in, but I'm just going to talk about a particular offering from my own group, which is security and trust research. So that's a sub-unit, research unit within TSSG. So this is some of my team. That's me on the right. The rest of my team are very busy and we didn't all come today. I have Frances Cleary, who's a project coordinator and project manager for my team. She's currently very busy organising a yearly cybersecurity and privacy conference that we do, which is a pan-European project funded through a EU project called Secord, and it's a 2.5-day conference which is running in Athens next week. So she's quite busy, busying herself with that. We also have Tom Curran, who's our business development officer, who in the case of, say, innovation vouchers, will help you go through the process of innovation voucher application process and through all the admin work that goes around that. And also Hussein Al-Safi, who's a research fellow specializing in trust management and privacy and data protection. So just to give a little bit of, I'd just like to talk about trust a little bit, because you probably hear all the time that trust is essential for business. If we want to drive our business and grow our business, we need to understand trust. And you hear this all the time, and I know you're all familiar with that, and everybody understands that trust is essential. But often what's not discussed is how do you actually build that trust, and once you have built it, how do you maintain it and grow it and protect it. So one thing that's interesting about trust is that it's quite difficult to gain. But once you've gained it, it can be actually quite easy to lose, and once you lose it, after having gained it, regaining it is much more difficult than gaining it in the first place. We all know that instinctively. But how do we go about building this trust and protecting it in the first place? So a recent report from Edelman, who do a yearly trust barometer, stated that there were 3 key behaviors to building trust. First of those is protecting consumer data. Second of those is respecting your employees' rights. And the third one was providing a secure supply chain. And for the rest of my talk here today, I'd like to talk about the first of those points, which is about protecting your consumers and your clients' data. So if you look at your assets, your customer data is probably your most valuable digital asset. Your customers' trust is vital to your business. And your customers trust you with their personal data. So think about this, that you're holding data on behalf of your customers. So I'd like you to think about yourself from your customer's point of view, that you as the data subject. So how would you feel if your credit card details were not protected correctly by retailers? So this concerns an example which is available on the Data Protection Commissioner's website, one of his case studies, where he received a call from somebody in a housing estate. He said, I'm finding on the road outside, I'm finding some slips of credit card transactions. So they investigated and they discovered that this was coming from a local retailer who reported that, yeah, we seem to have lost 700 slips of credit cards, and these were turning up as litter on local streets. So they said, we'll look to retrieve all of these, and of the 700 that they have lost, they managed to retrieve 500, so 200 were never retrieved. Now you may think, okay, it sounds relatively harmless, it's probably the last 4 digits of the credit card on, but actually no, it wasn't. It was the entire credit card number plus the expiry date. And for many merchants online, that's all you really need. Okay, so the point that was being made was that the organisation didn't really have a handling policy in place that was being adhered to, and just through very simple mistakes, they leaked this information. Now, interestingly, they contacted the credit card company because they knew the numbers, the actual credit card numbers of the leaked information. But the credit card company said, well, we're not in a position to give you the names and addresses of those customers because that breaches data protection laws. Additionally, the credit card company said, in this case, we wouldn't actually contact customers directly, but we would monitor their accounts for fraudulent activity. So the retailer wasn't even in a position to apologise to the customers because he wasn't aware of who the customers were. So this is just one example. How I'd like you to think, like, how would I feel if that was my data? So in terms of cost of the data breach, I'm missing a slide here. Am I not? No. Okay. So in terms of the cost of a data breach, should you leak data, what is the cost to your business? And I don't really want to talk about the financial cost because that's probably less important. The cost to your business is a loss of reputation, a reduction in that also important trust, therefore a potential loss of customers, and a loss of business. So the cost of a data breach, even though there is a potential for a maximum fine of €100,000 in Ireland, that's really, I don't think there's been any case where €100,000 has been enacted. But the real cost here is the loss of business through loss of reputation and loss of trust. So just like to give an example, a very simple example of client list moving from employer A to employer B. So this was about, this was about a salesperson who moved from employer A to employer B and brought his client list with him. And when he went to employer B, he rang up one of his clients and said, I no longer represent my previous organization, I now represent this organization, but I can provide you with the same services. The recipient of the phone call thought this doesn't sound right at all because I'd never actually signed up to employer B or their services, and contacted the Data Protection Commissioner's office. And it turns out that when the Data Protection Commissioner's office contacted the employer B, they had no idea that this client list was actually in existence. When they contacted the employer A, they also had no idea that this client list had left their protection. So customer A was in breach of the Data Protection Act because they hadn't protected the customer's data, and employer B was in breach of the Act because they were, through no knowledge of their own, but they were contacting individuals who had not provided consent to be contacted for that service offering. So in both cases, both of these employers were entirely unaware of the fact that they were in breach of the Data Protection Act, but both of them actually were. The lesson, I suppose, there to be learned was that really from employers A point of view, in terms of education of their employees, that the client list is not the property of the salesperson, but it's actually the property of the employer. So, in terms of data protection, I suppose the question is, you need to ask yourself, are you a data controller? So if you ask yourself the question, do you keep or process any information about living people? And if the answer to this question is yes, then under the Data Protection Act 1983, you are a data controller. And as a data controller, you have a set of responsibilities and obligations. And there are 8 key responsibilities. The first is that you obtain and process the information fairly, and the second is that you keep it for one or more specified and lawful purposes. The third one is that you process it in ways that are compatible with the purposes for which it was collected in the first place. That you keep it safe and secure, that you keep it accurate and up to date, and that it's adequate, relevant, and not excessive for the purpose. And that you retain it for no longer than is necessary for specified purposes, and that you can provide a copy of his or her personal data to any individual on request. So, a good acid test for whether you're compliant with the Data Protection Act is to ask yourself these questions. If one of your clients said, can you explain to me for each of these key responsibilities what you have in place to ensure that you meet those responsibilities? So if you put yourself in the position of the client and ask yourself, how could I demonstrate to our customers that we're aware and responsive for these responsibilities? There are further complications as well, one of which is migration to cloud services, which of course reduces costs, but also has more complications in terms of data protection. And coming down the road, we have the EU General Data Protection Regulation, which is in response to globalization changes in technology markets, cloud computing, and this will be adopted in 2014 with a transition period of implementation over 2 years, over 2016. So this is a new pan-European regulation that's coming down the line that will affect your business processes in the next 2 years. And this particular regulation, there are four, just to pick out 4 parts of it. There's a single set of rules now for pan-European countries, so for all member states will have the same set of rules. So in the previous DPD from '95 is a directive from the European Union, which is then implemented in member states as law. In this case, this has changed now, because this is going to be the same set of rules across Europe. It includes the right to be forgotten. So this means that when your client removes their consent, says, I no longer give you consent to process my data in any way, you must, under this new regulation, delete all data about that customer. In some cases, for some organizations, that might be quite simple, but in other cases, such as, for example, where you have, and these are where the complications come in here, where you've been perhaps backing up your data over a period of, say, the last 5 years, and one of your customers says, I want to remove all my data, I have the right to be forgotten, so I want you to remove every trace of me from your databases. What about your backups as well? What about information that you've inferred from that client's data? Really quite complex. There's also an element to this regulation about data portability, that you're obliged to be able to provide to your client their data in a format that they can then transfer to a similar service. Well, how do we do that? And finally, there's a revised responsibility and accountability. So there's an obligation under this law that your business processes have embedded privacy by design and security by design embedded in your data processes. So these are changes in regulation that are coming down the road 2 years away and coming quite fast. So ultimately, I guess you have to ask yourself, as a data controller, am I compliant? Are you obliged to register annually with the Data Protection Commissioner? There's a set of, if you go to the Data Protection Commissioner's website, you can find some information on discovering whether you're required to register. Do you have data handling policies in place? So have you developed some policies within your organization for this handling of data? Are they adequate to the policies that you have? Are they adhered to in practice? Are they reviewed regularly? And are they embedded in your training programs? So can you improve? Well, we can help you improve. We can evaluate your data handling process. We can identify weaknesses in that process. We can provide you with recommendations for improvement of that process, and we can assist in the development of data handling policies for your organization. We'll also help you future-proof those processes with a view on the upcoming regulation, pan-European regulation, and also in terms of migration to cloud services with future legislative changes. So how can we go about doing this? Well, as already discussed from Barry, under the Enterprise Ireland Innovation Programme, we can help you apply for the voucher itself, so we can reduce the administrative barriers in actually doing the application process. What's the cost? So that's obviously the bottom line. Everybody wants to know what the cost is. So an innovation voucher provides you with a voucher of €5,000, and you can use this voucher to exploit our expertise to protect your business. How do you engage with us? Just you can speak directly with me here today, or any of TSSG here, or Barry also, or Willie, and then we will help you with this application. We will visit your business and examine your data handling processes, and sit down and understand exactly how it is that you handle this data, how you process this data, how various employees within your organization have access to data, whether that access is appropriate, whether you have policies in place. If you don't have policies in place, we can help you develop those policies. And finally, we'll provide you with a report of our findings and recommendations to improve your data handling processes. So in summary, there's often some uncertainty about compliance. And I remember I gave this presentation to some financial service providers in the southeast a couple of weeks ago, and after I was walking around talking with the delegates, and I was saying, like, so are you compliant? Do you think you're compliant? And most of them actually said, we have no idea. So I think there's often, like, particularly in the SME sector, there's often uncertainty about compliance. And SMEs, I find, are often very busy with just getting on and trying to survive without putting too much effort really into ensuring that their data handling processes are up to scratch. I didn't receive a letter from the Data Protection Commissioner, therefore I must be compliant. So okay, nobody's complained yet, so let's just keep going. So there are also complications in future legislation. We can provide data handling assessment so we can help. So please feel free to contact me in the room after these talks, or you can email me at this address, and these slides are being distributed.